think we're all set, right? It says recording?
That's it.
Okay. Let me double check. Okay.
The red light's on, so.
Okay, perfect. I know. I'm just, last thing I want is for us to do this for an hour and then you'd be like, I didn't hit record. Anyways, let me get started. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Michelle Maldonado and I am Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at the University of Scranton. And today I have the pleasure and privilege of not only introducing, but spending a little time with Father Greg Boyle, who is our Ignatian Values in Action lecturer for the 2020-2021 academic year. Father Boyle, or G, as his homies affectionately call him, has dedicated his life to ministering to the modern day outcasts of contemporary US culture. Young, poor, brown men and women who are caught in a seemingly endless cycle of violence and crime. A native of Los Angeles, Father Boyle attended Loyola High School and was influenced by the liberation theology of the Jesuit community. He was ordained in 1984 and was immediately posted in a small rural Bolivian parish. The challenge of this experience radicalized him, and he describes this as a turning point in his life. After his time in Latin America, he realized that he wanted to work directly with the poor. In 1986, he is transferred to Dolores Mission. Here, he was met with new challenges, for Dolores Mission is situated in one of the most dangerous and gang-infested areas in East Los Angeles. In order to gain their favor, Father Greg spent countless hours in the community, walking the streets and meeting individuals. He began to notice that the gang problem was the center of most of the community's problems. And so in 1988, he opened a junior high and high school for gang members called Dolores Mission Alternative. He also began hiring gang members to work around the church. Father Greg grounds his ministry in the gospel message of Jesus's inclusive vision of community that embraces the marginalized and oppressed. He came to understand that poverty is at the root of street gangs' power. Individuals stay in gangs out of necessity, confronted with rejection whenever they attempt to seek employment outside of illegal gang life. Providing jobs for ex-gang members became the starting point of his ministry. His initial outreach has evolved into a substantial center that includes a job referral program, free tattoo removal, a silk screening company, a bakery, a graffiti removal service, and a cafe. In addition to the concrete economic opportunities he facilitates, Father Greg also empowers these young men and women by recognizing their full humanity, a subversive act within a society that devalues gang members as hopeless criminals unworthy of opportunities. Through the respect and trust he instills upon thousands of women and men and the economic opportunities he provides them, Father Greg and Homeboy Industries is combating Los Angeles' gang problem one soul at a time. It is a privilege to have you with us today, and we look forward to our time together. And so now I'm going to turn to some questions submitted by our first-year students who have read your book as part of their first-year seminar. So the first question is pretty broad. Could you please define kinship and marginalization for us?
Well, so kinship is kind of God's dream come true. So it's about that you may be one is what Jesus says. And so it's about imagining a circle of compassion and then imagining nobody standing outside that circle. So those on the margins are the folks who are left out or excluded. And so if you take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which is 4 things, inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance, then you go out to the margins, not to bring them to the center or something. You go out to the margins so that you will stay out at the margins, so that the circle will widen and widen and widen, so that there is no us and them, there's just us. So you obliterate the illusion that we are separate. And kinship is about exquisite mutuality, where there's no daylight that separates us. And it's not about, folks going to the margins to rescue, fix, or save. It's about you don't go to the margins to make a difference.
Right.
You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And so then it's that's how people inhabit their mutual nobility and dignity. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Okay. And how do you see Homeboy Industries informed by and also embodying Ignatian values?
Well, Ignatius, first of all, Ignatius would say, take care to keep always before your eyes first God. It's kind of a convoluted sentence, but it's about that the ministry, the secret of the ministry of Jesus was that God was at the center of it. So for Ignatius, it was about finding God in all things. And so, it insists that the sacred is right in front of you. And so I don't know. I mean, Ignatius had lots of kind of notions, and that certainly was one of them. And then in discerning as you are at the margins, what is it that we are to do, and what are the things that are free and devoid really of ego, and what are the things that keep us putting first things recognizably first, and living as though the truth were true. So that's kind of what the invitation is.
Okay. So I want to read you a quote that one of our students, actually a few of our students, lifted out. When speaking upon the belief of heaven, you state, and here I'm quoting, "We believe that God is inclined to decline our credit card, that our account with God has insufficient funds," end quote. Why do you think so many people are inclined to think that somehow God's grace is limited, for lack of a better word?
Well, we're always projecting onto God, who we are. And it's always important to kind of, again, Ignatius would talk about the God who's always greater. And so Mirabai Starr, who's a mystic and writes about mystics, she's a friend, and she has a book called The God of Love. And she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And that's kind of what you need to do all the time. So you're always ought to be on the lookout for all the wrong gods we set up. There's a kind of a partial God. We've settled for a partial God. So the God who is disappointed in you, wrong God. And, the God who wants you to measure up or thinks you could do a better job, that's still a wrong God. And so, and it takes a lot of refining, because otherwise we settle. And we don't know that what we've in fact settled for is our projection of God. So there's nothing more consequential in anybody's life than your notion of God. Not God, because God is sort of unchanging. But your notion of God will absolutely call shots. It is in the driver's seat. It will determine exactly what you do or don't do. And which is why throughout history, of course, people have justified horrific things in the name of God. But so that's why the task is always, how do you refine your sense of God so that you see as God sees? And that's the key thing. Meister Eckhart, who was a mystic and a theologian, said, it's a lie any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. And that's what you need to arrive at, are these notions that are purifying, that get you to a place of a God who's more true and spacious and expansive. Otherwise, we settle for a puny God.
Well, and I think about it too, I always like to teach the parable of the lost son, right? And I often, when I tell students, often you read that parable or the prodigal son, as it's also known, and people identify with the prodigal son that, kind of took off, spent the inheritance, sort of abandoned his father, and then when he returns, gets welcome with open arms. And I say, yes, that's us, but we're also the other brother, the one that doesn't understand his father's forgiveness, right? That sort of questions why his dad, celebrates his brother's return in spite of everything that he's done. So that makes me think of what you just said, sort of that notion that it's hard for us even to compute, to understand God's forgiveness and love.
And it's not even a story about forgiveness, because you find me anywhere in there where the father says, I forgive you.
Right, exactly.
Or asks the kid to kind of, let's go over this. Here's what you did to me. Mm-hmm. No, I was in Rome at a conference before the pandemic, and and they had every continent every day would lead the prayer at the beginning. And so Africa had the last day, and they danced. It was kind of thrilling, they just danced. And then they talked about the prodigal son story, and they said that at first they said it's the only place in the scripture where God runs, is what they said, because the father runs while the son is still a long way off. And then the guy leading the prayer thing said, actually, we think that God is dancing towards his son, Mm-hmm. And it's a fascinating thing because it's quite public, in as much as all the neighbors who know what this kid did is watching the father who runs out there, and the son has a fake ass apology. It doesn't even want to listen to it. It's you were lost and now you're found. You were dead and now you're alive, and fatted calf time. So again, that's so expansive.
Yeah.
And it doesn't require anything. It's all love. So God is kind of monosyllabic. God has a very limited vocabulary. It's just love. We think it's a lot of other things like judgment and exacting and demanding and requiring things, and no.
Yeah.
And that's what's so radical.
It's so true. Well, let's see. So this is the student's question. I noticed throughout the book that a common theme was finding God in all things. God is not only in the church, but God is with us at every moment in our lives. The book stresses that we must find God in everything, whether they are bad or good. It is easy to find God in the positive parts of our lives, but how should we go about finding God in the negative parts of our lives?
Well, all of it is gift. You lean into grief, and you don't want to, but you lean into grief, and then it becomes, you're curious about the grief, and then you can savor it. Mm. And then Ignatius has a weird word. He talks about relishing. So then you get to a place where you're relishing the grief, and then that's just a short hop and a hallway toward joy. Mm-hmm. And so that's how you get to joy. But the minute you start to sift things, I always think of the wedding vows, where you, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. It doesn't say in good times and in bad. I mean, in good times, we'll be happy, and in bad times together we'll be sad. Or in good health, things will be great, and in illness, not so much. No, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, always joy. That's kind of what the commitment is, and that's what the promise is. That it doesn't matter. You have a light grasp on these things, and you don't cling to anything, which the Buddhists would maintain is the source of our suffering. And then you say, bring it on. I'm going to delight in whatever comes my way. If it's a pang, I was texting a homie who was trying to get him into a rehab, and kind of a hard-headed guy, and back and forth. And finally he says, hey, kick me down with some feria, which means money. Mm-hmm. I said, I will only help you. I've always helped you. If I gave you money, it wouldn't be helping you. So you need to be in a rehab. And then I wrote, texting, I know you've burned every bridge, with your family, with your sisters, with your brothers, with your friends. You will never burn this bridge with me. And I pushed send. And he responded right away. He wrote, "Fuck your bridge." I went, whoa. And I remember you get hit by it, and then you feel the sting of it, and you want to go back at him and say,
okay, no, I'm just kidding.
You want to say, let me give you a lesson on where I've been for you.
Yeah.
But you don't do that. You lean into it, and then you're curious about it. And then you're savoring it. Then you're relishing it, and then it's joyful. He ended up going to rehab, and he's back working for us now. But it's like, that's the way I think you're supposed to kind of lean into things. And in fact, it became, I told my council, which are all homies who run the thing, I told them about it, and it's become kind of a catchphrase. Before the pandemic, they'd hug me and whisper in my ear, "Fuck your bridge." And I go, "Hey, thank you," and I get all verklempt, because it's like, because it's our way of communicating. But that's how you go through one door and come out another door. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what's thrown at you,
So this next question is sort of connected, and how do you remain so positive through it all and continue to have such a strong sense of faith? In other words, how do you find hope in the midst of suffering?
Well, people always talk about, did this shake your faith? And I always say, no, things shape my faith. And so it's just a way of seeing, and I don't ever blame God for anything, so that helps. So I feel like God protects me from nothing and sustains me in everything. And so that's a different thing. So how do you stay anchored in love and tethered to the God who is tender, who reminds you of your own unshakable goodness? So the hardest part is just to stay anchored in the present moment. How can you stay right here at this moment? That's the only way you can stay hopeful and positive, really. Otherwise, you're lamenting what happened yesterday, or you're anxious about what will happen tomorrow, and you're missing out on what's happening right now. So it's the key, and it's hard to do. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that it's easy, but it's kind of, you choose it every moment. You choose to be where you are, and as Ignatius says, to do what you're doing, and to be kind of right there and delighting in the person in front of you. Otherwise, you're lost. You're not selfish, but you're self-absorbed, and it's all become worry and anxiety, and why did I say that yesterday? And it can throw you off.
Well, and the student didn't ask this, but kind of to piggyback, since I can, I also think, something I see in your talks and in your writing too, is the role of humor and laughter, right? In the midst of suffering. As I'm Cuban American, and Cubans are notorious for this, right? We get through life by not taking it too seriously through our humor, right? And that's sort of a survival mechanism for the Cuban people, is the use of humor in the face of suffering and adversity.
It's funny that you should say that, because there was a homie whose father died, and so very complicated relationship, and certainly he's excavated, the father wound, and a lot of pain there. So he came in, and so we were going over the arrangements for his funeral, and I said, "What was your father's name?" He said, "Manuel." And I said, what did his friends call him? And he said, "Lots of names." I said, "What did your mom call him?" And he says, "Nothing nice." I remember we looked at each other and we just died laughing because it was rapid fire, you know, nothing nice. And it was just kind of you know, it's death and it's a painful relationship and or like a homegirl came to me and she suffered so much abuse and violence and every imaginable kind of abandonment, you know, and she was telling me about a dream she had the night before. And she said, I was dancing with God. And I said, wow. And she said, everyone tried to cut in and God wouldn't let them. And we just looked at each other, you know, and it was like, that's the God I believe in, the God who's not letting anybody cut in, you know, and it was so sweet after all she had suffered in her life that she had this very tender moment in a dream, you know.
Yeah. Well, you said in your book that there are no monsters, just monstrous actions. Do you have any tips on distinguishing a person from their actions or on forgiveness?
Yeah, I'm kind of with the Dalai Lama on this one, you know, where he says all of us have Buddha nature, which is what I call unshakable goodness. Everyone, no exceptions. Now, so people can be blind and there can be toxins and there are things that, you know, like, for example, malignant narcissism or sociopathy, for example, you know, that leads you to be unable to see your goodness. And so it's an unfortunate thing because moral outrage has replaced moral compass, and they're not the same thing, you know. So I don't ever say evil. I don't even say sin. I never say bad person, you know, because it's unsophisticated. It's ham-handed. It's we're not even trying when we say evil or monster or sin even, you know. It's not about sin. It's not about evil. It's about wound. It's about pain. The homies have taught me that in 36 years because I've never met an evil person. I've never met a bad person. I've met all sorts of people who've killed other people, but I've never met an evil person. I've met traumatized people. I've met hugely damaged people. I've met lots of mentally ill people. And, but I've never met an evil person. And I think it's unsophisticated. It's a little bit like Jesus in the gospel, and he cures a guy possessed by demons, and the whole crowd says he's possessed by demons. And even Jesus says he's possessed by demons. And I don't question the cure. I think Jesus, the treatment plan worked. The guy got cured, but the diagnosis was wrong. He wasn't possessed by a demon. He's having convulsions. He's having seizures. He has epilepsy, which is fine. Go ahead and cure him. You know, in 2020, well, here's some medicine that will help you control those seizures. But he has epilepsy. So there's a kind of, it's a good parallel to how we are, you know, because we're saying, no, he's possessed by a demon. I go, no, newsflash. It's an actual disease that he never chose. It chose him. In the same way, even throughout scripture, you know, it's like, you know, did that guy's blind? Does that mean his parents did something that caused that blindness? Nonsense. We look at that and we go, no, you know. You know, it's an odd time right now because I have at least, I can count 5 people who homies, and some I don't even know, you know, who are a combination of meth and not taking their meds and are like psychotic and who want to kill me. You know, I had a cop call me just the other day said, you know, some nurse from White Memorial Hospital in the mental unit, the guy's hearing voices, and the voices are telling him to kill Father Boyle. I've never met this guy. He's never been to Homeboy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take that stuff personally. This is mental illness. And, you know, and if he were to be successful, you know, I wouldn't want anybody to call him evil, bad, monstrous. I mean, none of us are well until all of us are well. And it's about health. Yeah, there was a Jesuit university right after the horrible shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue, mm-hmm. where all those folks were killed. Well, naturally, we go, well, it was a synagogue, so it's anti-Semitic, and then you say it's a hate crime. And there was a Jesuit university that started a seminar called Hate. And the whole notion, of course, is we're going to address hate. And I thought at the time, I went, yeah, if you called the course health, you'd probably make better progress. Because this is about health. Nobody's ever met a racist or white supremacist or an anti-Semite or a homophobe who was healthy. You've never met one. I mean, it's how you measure wholeness and integration and health. Healthy people don't travel from Illinois to Kenosha and kill two people. They don't do it. This isn't, I'm not being judgmental. It's a judgment call. You go, nobody would measure health that way. To say, no, it's a perfectly healthy thing for a 17-year-old to have an AR whatever and cross state line and do whatever. No, this is not healthy. Nor is it healthy to grab the back a shirt of somebody and then put 7 bullets in his back. Mm-hmm. This is not, health never looks like that.
Right.
You know, and I don't have to hate anybody. And I think if you're saying, you know, we're going to address hate, and I go, good luck with that, because when you do address hate, then it's high moral distance. I don't hate, I'm going to address hate, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's otherizing, it's completely otherizing, which is the opposite of the kinship of God. And that's why it's important to kind of stand against forgetting that we belong to each other, that none of us are well until all of us are well. And no lives matter until Black lives matter. So this is how I think, and everybody belongs. And so at Homeboy, we're always dealing with severed belonging, that, you know, that everyone who walks through our doors here, their lives have been hijacked by their own trauma. And they've been severed, they've been cut off from their own aliveness. Mm-hmm. And so it's about attachment repair. But it's about saying, no, you're not your rap sheet, you're not your list of felonies, you're not your tattoos, you are unshakably good. A homie texted me the other day and he said, hey, Pops, how can I be a better man? Now you might hear that and you go, oh, how great that he's aspiring to that. I just felt it broke my heart. So I texted him back, I said, you couldn't be one bit better. Mm. And I think, you know, again, God doesn't see sin, God sees Son. And that's the mystical way of seeing. That's how Jesus saw. That's how Ignatius saw. Where you see wholeness. And the minute you can see wholeness, there aren't good people or bad people. You know, there aren't evil people. Right. There aren't monsters. You can't find one anywhere. Not even in the White House. I'm sorry. Everybody has, you know, just this goodness that is unshakable, immutable, not a thing you can do about it. But if you're a stranger to yourself, then you don't know it. You don't know your goodness. Right. And that's a problem. And so, you know, people can say Donald Trump is a racist, but his mental illness presents as racist, as sexist, as anti-Semite. That's how his illness presents. And, I don't know. If I were a family member, I'd probably do an intervention. I'd say, hey, come here. Yeah, you need some real help. He's not evil. He's not a monster. He's not even bad. He just doesn't know his own goodness because he's a stranger. And mental illness is real, which makes, I think, him worthy of our compassion and absolutely unfit to be president of the United States. So both are true, and I don't have to demonize anybody in the course of saying that.
Right. Well, I was going to ask a little later, but since you raised it, one of the students asked, you write about the communication and interactions between police officers and the homeboys. How does this relate to recent scandals with police brutality in the world today? And how do you feel, which you've already answered in part, how do you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, I think it's a monumental turn for the country, because denial is sort of what undergirds racism in the first place. It supplies it oxygen. And, I think the Black Lives Matters movement has awakened a language that's really quite essential. And it helpful in many ways, but again, I always want to get underneath things,
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw somebody in wearing a t-shirt that says love not hate, and I go, yeah. The problem with that is, again, it's over and against, we love, apparently you hate, and we're going to address this head on, as I mentioned earlier. So but that slogan, none of us are well until all of us are well, was part of a campaign here in LA County from the Department of Mental Health, and all the buses and billboards, none of us are well till all of us are well. It's hard to imagine a more Christian statement than that, because what it essentially says is we belong to each other. Mm-hmm. And that nobody is to be outside of the circle of compassion, nobody. And that it's the same principle of, no lives matter until all Black lives matter. And so it's the same idea that, we're always encountering severed belonging, and you never want to contribute to that. Mm-hmm. And you want to contribute to its opposite, which is, that you may be one, as Jesus says. And so the interesting thing about our God is God is not, though we project onto God that, God wants us to, praise him and worship him. But that's just because we project that onto God, because that's what I would want if I was God. I would want people to be talking about me, But the generosity and the humility of our spacious God is that it's not about God. It's about us. It's about how inclusive God is. Inclusion. And so who's outside? Don't let anybody be outside the tent. And that's the challenge of living the gospel and living from the marrow of the gospel.
Well, and I think too, right? I feel like it gets more challenging every day, because the lines in the sand between us and them, however folks construct those categories, seem to just keep getting more deeper. Do you know what I mean? Like, people are sinking into this notion of an us and them, and feeling so comfortable. Do you know what I mean? With that language and that identity.
But it's an illusion. I mean, the separation is an illusion. And you earlier talked about policing, and part of the, sometimes we're just not even trying in terms of getting to solutions. And it's kind of deeper than you could have an LAPD at the academy here. You could train for, unconscious bias and kind of sensitivity in terms of race and how to de-escalate. But way underneath is a notion that somewhere out there are bad guys. And you can reduce it to saying, cops think that the black person is the bad person. You could, except it's not very sophisticated. It's still not very sophisticated. Though you can see on the screen in Kenosha, the guy with the AR 17-year-old white guy walking with his gun and nobody's stopping. Can you imagine if a black 17-year-old was carrying a gun? I mean, it's just unimaginable. Mm-hmm. And that part is absolutely true, and it's part of our American pathology. But it's also true that what I want to train cops to believe, that there is no such thing as a bad guy. Because the minute there is such a thing as a bad guy, all bets are off. If you plant evidence, excessive use of force, lethal use of force, come on, they're bad guys. Why are you quibbling? And that was my experience. I've buried 236 young human beings killed because of gang violence. I always say gang members, gang violence. But in the last 10 years, the majority of those that I've buried have been killed by law enforcement. And it's funny that didn't happen. The odd thing was that didn't happen so much my first 15 years. But the first 15 years were Neanderthal. I mean, horrible. Those were the days of, beating up gang members or dropping gang members off in enemy territory. Horrible things. And that's kind of stopped. And yet, you still have a mentality that says bad guys. And so a lot of folks killed by cops. So, but it's a more philosophical thing. It's not about let's train them to de-escalate. I guess so. But I would want to, really address the philosophical underpinning, which says I heard a cop say, talking about Compton, saying, 90% of the people live in Compton are really good people. And I obviously it's absurd because 100% of the people in Compton are good people. Yeah. But and he thought he was quite, whoa, what an enlightened law enforcement.
Whoa, for saying that.
Yeah, so it's like 90%, wow, there are that many good people in Compton? I mean, it's absurd. But hang on to your hats because he's a cop who thinks that there are 10% of the people who live in Compton are bad people. All bets are off, because they're going to do anything. And, rather than say, here's where we start. We start with goodness. That's who people are. And if you think there are 10% who aren't good, no. 10% are hugely traumatized or despondent or greatly damaged or mentally ill or on PCP. That's true. But thoroughly good, everybody's good. And people have bad days also. And not to get up on a tangent here, but 20 years ago, Amadou Diallo, who was immigrant from Ghana who was shot 41 times, by 5 officers in the Bronx. And it only came up because I was watching a Netflix documentary and a New York Times journalist was looking back on reporting and she had this statement. She goes, "We discovered that police weren't trained for innocence. And I thought that was brilliant, because that's exactly it. So when people say, well, race and de-escalation or all these kinds of tactical things, I guess, but that's the key. They weren't trained for innocence. They're trained to only see one thing, which is we are the good guys, and we got to protect all the other good guys from the bad guys. And that is a setup. And you can't have another outcome except all the outcomes that we're seeing.
Yeah. And that was actually a few students asked questions based on sort of police brutality and police officers and their interactions with homeboys. But then there were also certain questions that talked about what are ways that communities can empower themselves, particularly impoverished communities, communities where unfortunately violence is part of their everyday reality. What are ways that you've seen that are effective for communities to transform, I don't want to say their culture, I want to say their everyday existence, really, because it is in the end the everyday. And yeah, I'll just stop there for now.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I part of it is organizing. People need to be organized and to organize themselves. The other thing is to, make sure that their churches aren't antiseptic. That they're connected to the struggle, that they're organizing every day about, we live here, and it was always interesting because in the bad old days when you'd have yellow tape, I remember this happened right in front of my office. Some guy got shot and the yellow tape went up. And I knew the guy who got shot, and I kind of knew all the dynamics, but then all the people formed around the yellow tape, and the people inside were all cops and detectives. And it's funny, they kept screaming at the people outside the tape, screaming, and it was part of the training, it's kind of shock and awe, how do you control? You scream at them, stay behind the line, and then some woman's trying to get across to get to her work, screamed at, and I'm watching this and I'm just going, wow, you're screaming at the people who know who that kid is who was shot, who know who shot him, who knows his mom, and my kid played little league with the guy who's ran away with, with the gun. Again, it's like the notion was the yellow tape was formed and the people who were in the know were in the middle. But no, everybody who knew anything were outside. And more than that, they also know the guy who shot, and they know that his mom used to put cigarettes out on him and hold his head in the toilet and flush till he nearly drowned. They know all that stuff. They have a mystical view, which is to say they see wholeness. They can see the wholeness of the situation, the wholeness of each person. Why are you screaming at us? Right. Because we actually see this. To say nothing of the fact, if you wanted to solve this crime, it would make sense to make us allies, but it didn't happen. We were the fraternizers with the enemy. They even screamed at me, and they knew who I was, and it was like, wow, why are you doing this? But that's us and them writ large, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. So I have a question that's a little bit in a different direction, but several students asked this. And so as you know, these are first year students that just are off to college, and this is really a time when folks start to discern their faith and their identity because they're sort of on their own for the first time. So several students in different ways asked, how can your views on life be applicable to someone who does not consider him or herself a person of faith?
Well, I don't know. I mean, even if you're not, it's like you get the idea of find the goodness in the other person. That we find our true self in loving, whether you believe in God or not. That will always be true. It's always been true, and that's your true self, and that's where joy is. So then, once you kind of have that intentionality, so that your true self in loving, this is what I choose, and it has no relationship whatsoever to return. Will someone return this love? Once you're there, you're at, no, I love being loving. That's what I want. And once you have a taste of that, I mean, that part of the culture at Homeboy, is everyone comes here barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness, which is the highest form of spiritual maturity. And once you have a dose of it, I mean, so we've been around for 32 years, and I'm happy to say that, Emma Graham is our, I don't know if anybody knows her there, but anyway, she's a recent grad of your institution, and she's a Jesuit volunteer here. But she's, although it's different because we're kind of in a modified kind of thing, but masks and distance and such, but it's a culture. And so it's a culture of tenderness. And so if it's true that people who've come here, that if traumatized people will cause trauma, it's equally true that cherished people will find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And so that's the culture. And it's funny, in the old days, if a homie left us, I remember how fretful we were. Oh, maybe he'll be back. Nobody says that now, and which is really kind of quite stark. Nobody says that. They always say, he'll be back.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason is that you have this utter confidence once you have a dose of this culture where people are held in high regard, and it's intimate and hilarious and tender, they'll be back because it's the most compelling thing there is. So whether you believe in God or not, eventually people will stumble into, whether they can sustain it and choose it more often than not, but you stumble into the notion where real joy is located. It's in living from your true self, and to find your true self in loving. And so that's kind of the key. So it's better, I think, if you can kind of connect it to the God who loves you without measure and without regret. But in the end, Jesus doesn't say, here's what my parting words to you are. Worship me. Say my name as many times as you can each day. Yikes. No, he says, my joy, yours, your joy complete. That's it. And then kind of nudges us by saying that you may be one. And that the goal is not union with God even. It's with each other. And the joy is to be found in that exquisite mutuality of kinship. That's where it's located. And sometimes people stumble on it, and sometimes people don't. Or sometimes people are just blind from all the things that keep them a stranger to themselves.
Well, and also I would imagine, because a few students asked this too in different ways. Doubt is part of the journey, right? In terms of, you know, faith isn't linear. You know, you know, there are challenges, there are doubts, there's, because several students asked about sort of feeling doubt in the face of suffering, feeling doubt, you know, in the midst of a struggle, and how does doubt play a role in one's faith journey?
Well, it's really, you know, how does certainty play? You know, because you need to be worried if you're certain. Mm-hmm. Doubts are wonderful. Doubts are exactly where you're supposed to be. I was in Australia once, and a guy handed me a cell phone, which is, of course, my least favorite thing. Here, talk to my daughter. She's lost her faith. And I went, yikes. And I was just about to go on and give a talk in Australia, in Brisbane. And, you know, and a horrible thing had happened to her. And so she lost her faith. And I don't get it. You know, what did God have to do with that? You know, why would we blame God? Why would we make God homies always say, don't make God a crime partner, right. You know, and I don't get it, you know, but as soon as he said she's lost her faith, and I remember thinking to myself, aren't we supposed to?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like a snake shedding its skin, you know, aren't you supposed to? You know, because good Lord, if your faith in 2020 is the same as it was when you were in the third grade, God help us.
Yeah.
You know, so our notions evolve, and it's refining, and it's always trying to locate, as Ignatius says, the God who's always greater. And you have to surrender to that as it reveals itself to you every day. And this is why sin is not that helpful, you know, because it's not the fact of sin that gets us into trouble. It's the notion of sin. What's it mean? Sin sort of is self-estranging. It keeps you from yourself. Not the sin, but the notion of sin. Mm-hmm. Homie had gotten his hands on, I don't know what, it was a homily by a bishop. And he sent it to me. And then he was saying, it was basically, he felt like a piece of shit after seeing this homily and about how I need to have a contrite heart. And that's, I wrote him, I said, God doesn't see sin, God sees Son. And he wrote me back with such relief, you know, because it wasn't his sin that was keeping him estranged. It was his notion of sin, you know, that there was something absolutely deficient with him. Mm-hmm. And the truth was, he's only unshakable good and goodness. And that reality is awaiting his discovery. But once you discover it, we're good to go.
Yeah. So I have two last kind of check-in questions that are, the first is how has COVID impacted you, Homeboy Industries, and the sense of community sort of in the office? How have you all been impacted in the past few months?
Yeah, it's been hard, you know, and probably for the first 2 months, we were all kind of shut down. Although right away, we pivoted our bakery and our cafe to address food insecurity. So we, you know, lost a lot of customers and we couldn't have the cafe open, but we really pivoted. So we have city, county, and a contract with Jose Andres, who's the chef who started World Central Kitchen. So we produce 10,000 meals a week.
Wow.
And so that was a pivot. And then it's just different, you know, you know, I come in, you know, maybe 3 times a week in the mornings, and they have me in a little stupid tent outside because they're paranoid that I'm going to get sick. Right. So they don't let me in the building except to sneak up through the side stairs to do this Zoom with you. But so you use muscles that have sort of atrophied. So you're on the phone more, FaceTime, Zoom, of course, texting like a crazy person. So you're finding these other ways to be gentle and tender with each other. It's hard because we're a tactile place. We're a place where people are endlessly hugging each other, and that's kind of come to a halt. But you do the best you can. You know, these are odd times. You know, for sure.
Yeah.
But you know, part of my identity is going to detention facilities to say mass, or on a plane, or lugging a carry-on, you know, through an airport, or speaking at University of Scranton, or at a hotel ballroom to a conference of social workers. That was my life, you know, and it just sort of ended. So again, you lean into the grief of it, and then you find the joy in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I saved the most important question for last. A student would like to know, what is your favorite food from the Homeboy Bakery?
You know, it's funny. It's just terrible. I don't really.
No.
I don't really eat it. You know, but you know, people. I've had the coffee cake. It's wonderful. I mean, coffee cake and the cookies and things like that. But I try to steer clear of all that stuff. Though I encourage you to buy online our coffee cake and our tins of cookies.
Yes, and yes, we'll definitely give that information to our students. And actually, last time I was in Los Angeles in December, we went to the cafe at the airport at LAX.
Oh yeah.
To get our kids the cookies and stuff there.
Yeah, good, good.
Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation and to share a little bit about you and your work and the book with our students. They really appreciate it and have been very excited and engaged reading your book.
Thank you very much. A real privilege. I love your place.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have you here soon.
I'll get there before too long.
Exactly. Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye.